My name is Teresa McIntyre. I'm with the Utah State Board of Education. I am over our elementary arts assessments, which includes the PEEP. So today we're going to be looking at the PEEP exit and the administration of that assessment. So for those of you just joining us, please make sure you have your PEEP exit materials, or you can click on the link that I just dropped in the chat. Okay, so our learning intention is that participants will understand how to administer the PEEP exit assessment. And your success criteria is that you can navigate the PEEP teacher administration manual, which we're going to be going over today, and that you can administer the PEEP with fidelity. And that just means that you are giving the same exact administration to a student that they would receive from any teacher within the state. And so we're not providing any additional clues or hints about anything, any content, so that it's uniform across the state. Okay, so the goal is to really measure that early learning performance. So we are aligned it to our early childhood standards. We chose those indicators that are the greatest predictors of future academic success. We don't assess every single standard. We looked at just specific language arts and math standards that we felt like were the best predictors. We also have a section that includes lifelong learning practices. So this is a one-to-one administration. Your assessor, whoever is giving it, does need to be trained. So you're here today for that purpose, and have an optimal testing environment. So we don't want an environment where students are surrounded by noise and lots of other students, because that's not the optimal environment for that child. We want to provide as few distractions as possible. It is given the last 4 weeks of preschool, and data does have to be entered by June 15th into the data gateway. It has 14 scoreable items and 7 observational items. It is not a timed assessment, and it takes approximately 10 to 15 minutes to administer this assessment. So these are your responsibilities before you start with administration, that make sure you understand everything within that test administration manual, which we're going to go over today, that you work to set that testing schedule with parents and school administrators, and that you set up the needed testing materials in order to administer. So here's what you need. You need your PEEP exit teacher manual, the student materials, 7 counters that are all the same, and a piece of paper and a pencil. So our first question is around oral language for students. And so we're looking at engaging students in conversation and assessing that oral language piece. And the materials are the playground picture. So as you look at this assessment, it has the same parts as you saw on the entry, right? It includes the standards at the beginning, then we have the instructions, scoring directions, accommodated instructions, and then the materials and a sample record of response. So when we're giving this item, it's really important that, well, for all the items, that we follow the script exactly as it is written. If it tells you that you can give the student additional prompting, then you can give the student additional prompting. If it does not tell you you can give them additional prompting, then you should not give any additional prompting, and you should just give whatever the script is given. And if the student doesn't respond with an answer, then you would give them a score of 0. So it is important that the exact script is followed. So the script in bold is what is read, and the script in italic is the directions to the teacher. And it is important that you follow those directions if it's asking you to point to something or whatever directions it's giving. It's important that you follow those exact directions. So I'm going to give everybody about 30 seconds to read through the instructions, and then we'll see if there's any questions, and we'll talk about the scoring of this item. Okay, I'm going to give everybody about 30 seconds to just read through those instructions. Okay, any questions about the actual instructions?
I have a question.
Yes.
If they say, when you say point, if you say point to and tell me what else you see in the picture, and they say she's swinging on the swings, she's using the hula hoop, do we need to ask that question that says, now tell me what's happening in the picture?
I would still give them the chance to answer that. So you should still go through every part of it, even if they're answering with complete sentences, because you need that 4 or more objects or actions named. And then just for that fidelity piece and consistency, that every student's getting that same opportunity and same questions. You may not get anything more than what you've already gotten, or additional. So yes, you should still ask that even though you really already know the answer.
Okay, thank you.
So when we're looking at scoring, it is, the first part is pointing to and naming the objects or actions. So the student can get 3 points, 2, 1, or 0 points, depending on how many they name. And then we're looking at the quality of the storytelling. So the student responses must relate to the picture. And then that we're looking at complete sentence, only words or phrases, disconnected statements, or they don't tell you anything. Okay, so questions about scoring for this item. And just to be clear, a complete sentence should include the who, like who the sentence is about, and it should include a what, like what the person is doing. So in order to be a complete sentence, it needs to have both of those parts. So it could be the boy is playing basketball, right? Or the girl is jump roping. That includes the who and includes a what. It's not a very complex sentence, but it is a complete sentence.
What if they leave off the articles? So they'd say, girl is playing basketball, but they don't put the, you know what I mean? Or those little ones, words.
I would say that would still be a complete sentence in the fact that they did have that who, and they did have the what is happening, because the other choice is words or phrases, and that is definitely more of a full complete sentence than a word or phrase. Okay, the second and third questions are exactly the same instructions. We're looking at uppercase letter recognition and lowercase letter recognition. And so when we're doing this, right, students have the opportunity to identify those letters. It is important to note the discontinue rule. So your students who do struggle, if they cannot name any letters in the first row, you open up the entire page and say, look at all the letters, point to and tell me the ones you do know. So that we're not forcing them to go row by row. but instead opening it up for them to identify anything that they recognize. And then there is a reminder if a student's saying letter sounds, you can prompt them one time to say, just say the name. And so that's also important to remember that prompt if students are doing the error of saying letter sounds instead of the letter names. I'm gonna give everyone about 30 seconds to look through those directions. Okay, so when we're scoring this item, you're going to indicate incorrect responses. So if it's correct, we're just going to leave it alone and we're going to look at those incorrect responses. So if you're doing it on paper, on the paper scoring sheet, you were going to put a slash through anything that was marked that the student named incorrectly. And then within the data gateway system, you will just click on the letter and it will turn red with a little slash and will indicate that that entire or that letter was read incorrectly. If you select the checkbox at the beginning, it reads out the entire line. And then you can select all correct or all wrong for students who that applies to. And then as far as the lowercase, the one difference is that the lowercase L is incorrect if the student says I when naming lowercase letters. So the print does look similar, but we're looking at lowercase letters, so they should be naming that as an L because the lowercase I does not look like that L at all.
Okay, so I'm sorry, I must have missed the beginning. You're saying that these responses are what's online? Is this when we're entering it online or at the
Yes.
time of test? It's not at the time of testing, correct?
So
No.
at the time of testing, it's going to look like, if you are doing it on paper, it's going to look like this,
Right.
the scoring sheet. So you would put
Right.
a line through any letter that is incorrect.
Okay.
And then when
Or
you
that they don't say, right? Or that they don't, yeah, incorrect.
or they don't say, yeah. If they say it wrong or don't say it, it is considered incorrect. And then when you go online, this is what it looks like, and you would just select whatever letters you had marked as incorrect or not said by the student.
Okay.
And then you
Okay.
can select that all correct or all wrong. So when you are doing this on paper, there is no need to actually tally the score. So if you're taking the time to tally the score, stop, save yourself that time. And because the system will automatically tally the score when you input the data in the data gateway. Question number 4 is writing letters. And the first task is for students to write their name, and then they write a series of letters. And they get 2 points potentially from writing their name, and then 1 point for each correctly written letter. So I'm going to give you about 30 seconds to read through those directions, and then we'll see if there's any questions. Okay. And the scoring, when you are doing it on paper, you just indicate for writing their name, whether they got the 2 points, 1 point, or 0 points. And then any letters that they got incorrect, you would put a slash through to show that they got it incorrect. And then online, you are indicating the writing the name section and then the letters, and you can select all correct or all wrong for the letters. And when we're thinking about or looking at correct letters within the name itself, they only need 2 correctly written letters to get the 2 points. So, and then 1 point for 1 correctly written letter. Okay, first sounds. The first sounds does have directions that if no incorrect or no response is given, that you can repeat. Provide that first sound to the student and have the student repeat that first sound. Then there's also a reminder if the student's saying the letter name or the whole word. And then if there's also a discontinue rule. So this one has a lot of elements. If the student misses 4 consecutive sounds, you record a score of 0 and move on. So it is important to know those times where it's okay to give the reminder and know when you should discontinue so that we're not making students respond to things that they don't actually know. So I'm going to give you a minute to read through these instructions and then we'll discuss if there's any questions. Okay, when we're looking at scoring for this item on the paper version, you are just putting a check in anything that the student got incorrect. So marking anything incorrect, unless your center does the opposite, but and then online, you just put a slash, select any sound that the student got incorrect, and it will reduce those number of points. And again, you can select all correct or all wrong.
So I have a question. I
Yes.
teach at staff school until my students do not speak. What do I put down?
Yeah, so currently, this does not have a not applicable option. And that is something that will be added when we give that next one. And so you would then have to currently select all wrong. And then note, right, when we're thinking about and discussing scores with parents, that this was a not applicable question, which it does say it's not applicable, and you may skip the question, but you do have to input a score of 0 for the student currently. So we're looking at adding a not applicable option to this. So next year, that not applicable will be there as a selection.
Thank you. And then just a reminder to check your chat. You have some questions in there that you might want to answer. Thank you.
Okay, letter sounds. We're looking at identifying the names of upper and lowercase letters of the alphabet. And we have a materials page, which is just a picture of the letters of the alphabet, both upper and lowercase letters next to each other. And this also does have a discontinue rule. If they miss 4 consecutive sounds, you're just going to open it up to allow them to look at all the letter pairs and then point to and tell me the sounds you know. And they do have a prompt if they're saying the letter name, which they have just done, right? That you can prompt them to say, just say the sound. And this does say prompt as necessary, which means that you can use the prompt more than one time. So the last prompt was prompt. Oh, nope, the last one was prompt as necessary as well. So some of them say prompt once, some of them say prompt as necessary. So that gives you that option to say it multiple times for the student. So I'm going to give everybody about a minute to read through these directions. It is important that this is short vowels and soft, hard sounds for the G and the C. So when we're thinking about this assessment, notice it does allow you to pause up to 3 seconds on each letter pair to allow for the student to respond. We don't want to wait longer than 3 seconds because then it will take a long, long time to administer the assessment. Unless the student has extended wait time or extended time in their assessment within their IEP. And then you might pause for 5 seconds per letter to give the student that extended time. But for most students, that 3 seconds, if they aren't able to give you that sound, you would just put a line through that letter pair to indicate that the student was unable to give the sound. Or if the student gives you the wrong sound, then you would also put a line through that letter pair. And then online, you just select any letters that the student skipped or did incorrect. And you can select the little check at the front of the line to black out or red out the entire line, or select all correct or all wrong. Any questions before we move on to directionality? Okay. So this one we're looking at that really, can students understand print, right? Can they understand how we utilize print? And we're looking at going from top to bottom, from left to right, and from front to back. So this has 3 parts to it. And the picture is the picture that you show the student and ask them to then show you how the print is working on that page. So I'll give everybody a minute to read through that text. Okay, so notice there is a prompt if the student doesn't return sweep, and it does specify what is marked correct. Mark correct if they point to the first word, mark correct if they point to show movement from left to right, mark correct if they show a return sweep to the second line of the text. So that is what you're looking for. And they get 1 point for each of those things. On the paper scoring, it just has the 3 parts to it, and you just indicate, was that correct? Yes, a 1 point, incorrect, 0 points. And then online, it's the same type of thing. You indicate correct was yes, they were able to do it. Incorrect was no, they were not able to do it. Any questions about directionality? We're looking at concept of letter and word, right? The standard is really that students can recognize that letters are grouped to form words. And the student gets a point for pointing to a letter and a point to pointing to a word. And the directions are super short, so I'm going to give you about 20 seconds to read through those directions. Okay, so there is a sample record of response, and just thinking that you can put a slash through. So when we put this online, we just indicate correct or incorrect. So you don't need to, on the scoring sheet, it's like indicate what the student actually read. You would just put the first part, you'd put a slash through the C to show that the student did not respond correctly with the letter, and then you would put a slash through hat to show that the student did not respond correctly with the word. Or if they did, you would just put a score of 1, and you could circle the word or the letter C, you could circle the word hat. But when you go online, you just are indicating, is it correct or incorrect? So 1 point for pointing to the letter, 1 point for pointing to the word. Okay. Any questions lingering about literacy before we move on to our numeracy items? The rote counting, very short directions. So take about 20 seconds and take a look at, read through those directions, the instructions. Okay. Notice with the scoring, you are recording the last number the student said correctly. So on this scoring sheet, you are going to indicate whatever was the last number. So if the student said all the numbers correctly up to 15, but then 16 they got incorrect or skipped, you would circle 15 as the last correct response. And then when you go into Data Gateway, that would be what would be recorded. You can allow the student to continue counting until they get to 20. So for example, if they skip 16 and then they go 17, 18, 19, 20, 15 would be the last correct response, and that would be the number you would circle, but you don't have to cut them off if you can allow them to continue counting to 20. However, if they get to a number and they don't know what comes next at all, then they can just stop, and you would indicate that as the last number that they were able to count to correctly. And then on the scoring, you just select. So I just selected that the first incorrect was 16, and the system blocked out all the other numbers, and it configured that I got 3 out of 4 for my points. So you don't even need to know how many points at this point students get for counting, because the system's going to figure it out based on the last correct answer that was input into the system. So you select the first incorrect answer on Data Gateway, and it will read that and everything else that comes after. Any questions about that? So you, on the scoring sheet, I think I said circle the last correct answer. It's probably more accurate to put a line through the first incorrect response or skipped number to more accurately match what's here on Data Gateway. Numeral recognition. So we're looking at students naming numbers 0 to 10. So the last one was counting, and now we want to actually name those numbers from print. So going to give you about 30 seconds to look through and name or read through the directions. Okay, notice again, this one is a pause for 3 seconds maximum on each number, unless the student has an IEP with an accommodation that gives them extended time. But 3 seconds on each number to allow for response. If they don't know it, mark it as incorrect and point to the next number. So you are pointing to each number, not the students pointing to the numbers. And you're just going across on each row of the numbers on the page. So when the paper, you're just put a line through any numbers the student got incorrect. And then you're going to do the same thing, select incorrect responses on the Data Gateway. And again, you can select all correct or all wrong for that student. Any questions around numeral recognition? It's a pretty straightforward item. Okay, this one's a little more complex. This one-to-one correspondence, cardinality, and quantity to numeral, because the points are dependent upon the prior answers given by the student. So I'm going to give everybody a little bit of time to read through the instructions, and then we're going to spend some time looking at some examples and really thinking about the scoring. Okay, so this question does use the 7 objects we talked about earlier, that it's preferred if they're all the same color. If not, it doesn't significantly change things, but it is helpful. And then also the student material sheet, where there are numbers that the student is pointing to. So the student material sheet, it's just the page of numbers that looks exactly like, sorry, this page of numbers. It's this exact same page of numbers. So you're just using it again for this question. Here's how the scoring works. So you're looking at assessing all 3 parts for the 4 manipulatives, and then all 3 parts for the 7 manipulatives. And on the scoring sheet, it has it broken out like this. which I don't love this format. It shows the one-to-one correspondence with the 4, number 4, the number 7, and then you indicate for cardinality, did they get the number 4 and the number 7? Quantity to numeral, did they get the number 4 and the number 7? So you're just putting a slash through the numbers that were incorrect. And then for question number 11, how many points? Did they get 0, 1, or 2 points for the 4, 0, 1, 2 points for the 7? Online, it breaks it out by the 4 manipulatives and then the 7 manipulatives. Let's look at a couple of examples. So if the student says 1, 2, 4, 5 for the counting, they score 1 point because they didn't get that exact correct counting, right? So it's 2 points if they count the objects correctly using one-to-one correspondence, 1 point if they make errors in counting, and 0 points if they are unable to count the objects using that one-to-one correspondence. So the student gets 1 point for the counting. They ended on the number 5. So for the cardinality question, when we're asking, tell me how many there are, the student says 5. Because their answer for cardinality matches their answer for counting, they do score that 1 point. Then with the quantity to numeral, the student points to the 5. They would score 1 point because they pointed to the number that they had said for cardinality. So these answers are dependent upon each other, and the student gets credit even though the correct answer, technically correct answer for cardinality and quantity to numeral would be 4. They do get it correct because it relates to the number that they counted. So example 2, the student counts and says 1, 2, 4, 5. They get 1 point because they made an error with counting. But then the student says 4, they would get 0 points because their cardinality answer does not align with their counting answer and their final answer for counting. But if they say 4 and then they point to the number 4, they get point for that quantity to numeral because that aligns with the cardinality. Okay, and the last example, the student says 1, 2, 3, 4, which they would get 2 points for correctly counting, but then they say 5 for the cardinality, they would score 0 points because their cardinality response does not align to their counting. And then the quantity to numeral, if they point to the 5, they would get a point for that because their quantity to numeral aligned with their cardinality. So it's just important to understand the dependency when scoring this item. The next one, we're looking at numeral to quantity. So we're aligning the actual number with the number of objects. So take a minute and read through those directions. So this one, the student is aligning, you're pointing to the numbers at the top, and the student is then pointing to the number that is correct. Now, if a student self-corrects before you give them the next number, you can take that self-correction. If you give them the number 3 and they point to the 2, and then when you get to the 2, they like want to go back and correct the number 3, at that point they can't go back and correct it. So if they self-correct within about 3 seconds is the time frame we're looking at, and they point to the 2 at the beginning, you show them the 3, they point the 2, and then they say, no, wait, and they point to the 3, then you can consider that a self-correction. And self-corrections are allowed within the assessment, as long as they happen within about 3 seconds. And particularly for this item, it has to happen before you give them that next number. So the student has a potential to get 4 points. On the scoring sheet, you're just going to put a slash through any number that the student did not correctly identify. And online, you're just going to again put a slash through any number that was incorrect, or you can select all correct or all wrong. Okay, quantity discrimination. So we're looking at which ones are has more or less, right? So we're looking to compare quantity. So I'm going to give you about 20 seconds to read through those directions. Okay.
What? Done with the temples? Yeah.
So students get 1 point for each correctly identified number that is greater. And it does state to be correct, they have to identify by pointing to the greater number or by stating which one has more. So if they, for that first row, they said 8, then that is a correct answer. Or if they point to the 8 button, that is also, sorry, 6. They say 6 and they point to that 6 button, that is also correct. So either identifying it or point to it, and then just drawing a line through any incorrect response, because online you are just indicating points to 6, correct or incorrect. This would also be a great one to do, all incorrect or incorrect.
Thank you.
And just indicating for each row on the page, did they get that correct or incorrect? So we're looking at students drawing 4 different shapes. So take about a minute and read through those directions. So you do show this page of shapes to the student, and you are pointing to the picture and asking them to draw that shape on their own piece of paper. This one does not have a set amount of time. So if the student is a slower drawer, they can take as much time as they need to draw that shape. And it is important that they do demonstrate the properties of that shape in order to be given the correct credit. So a square does need to have 4 sides and 4 corners, but if it's more rectangle, that's okay. A circle does need to be circular in shape, right, in order to be correct. That triangle does need those 3 points, but it could be a tall, skinny triangle or a really short, fat triangle. And then obviously that plus sign, the 2 lines do need to be perpendicular to each other. Or sorry, they don't have to be perfectly perpendicular to each other, but one line should be obviously vertical and the other line should be obvious horizontal. They don't have to be right in the middle or form perfectly nice 90-degree angles in order to demonstrate the property of that shape. So within Data Gateway, you just mark, is it correct or incorrect for each of the 4 shapes? Or 3 shapes and a plus sign. Okay. The very end is just those lifelong learning practices, observational inventory. So this is based on your observation with the student during the assessment time. How well were they able to respond? Their effort, their attention and focus, how well did they listen and follow directions, and what was the quality of their responses? So you're just paying attention as you're giving this assessment to the student, and then noting where they fall within the range of answer options. So this is on page 32 and 33 of the manual. So I'm going to give everybody just a couple minutes to look through, and if there's any question or discussion around this. So we did talk about the accommodations, right? Pages 36 through 38. And if you do need Braille for any reason, that and large print, that is available from Tracy Gooley, and I have her email address as well on the last page. Then there's the scoring sheet. Your submitting within the Data Gateway. And there was a question at the beginning about Spanish or any other language. Directions can be translated, but directions referring to non-item content. So that's like, we're going to be taking a test that assesses, or, you know, that asks you about letters and numbers and sounds, and please do your best, and you need to respond in English. And that can be said in a student's native language so that they understand what's happening and the context of what you're doing. But those actual specific item directions that are bolded, those all have to be given in English, because we are looking at students' ability to understand and respond in English. If that is the scores that have to be input into the Data Gateway. If you want to see how a student might be able to respond on the math items, if they were asked in their native language, you can then do that after the assessment has been given in English, but those scores would not be reported in the Data Gateway. But that would be more information as their knowledge in relation to their native language versus in English. And that would really only be applicable to the, well, it could be applicable to the language arts items as well, but specifically those numeracy items. So opt-outs are not, they're not an allowable thing that parents can choose to opt their child out at this point on the opt-out form. If a parent refuses to have their child participate, we do have to honor that, but it's not on the actual formal opt-out form. When we're putting data into the Data Gateway, this is the website address. And if your profile is locked at all, please email me and I can unlock your profile and give you access to the Data Gateway if you need that. I won't create your access, but I can unlock your profile for you. So in order to administer, you go into My Tools on the Data Gateway, you'll select the PEEP assessment, and then you will select Administer PEEP. And then to enter scores, you just select where it says Not Started. You will select if an accommodation was used. And we're looking specifically at those accommodated directions, and then any other accommodation like breaks or directions reread, you would select this little box and then you submit your scores, and it will show you actual scores in the boxes, and then you can view the assessment results is the view screen. The student report is the parent student report with all of their information. So the view actually brings up like the Data Gateway scoring platform. if you need to review anything there, or the student report. Once a student score has been submitted, it cannot be changed unless you reach out to me and I can go in and unlock or delete a student score. So that has to go through me at the state level to do that. And general testing questions directed towards me or Sydney McCarty is my boss, and she's over all of the content for state assessments. And we have our accommodations and alternate assessment with Tracy Gooley, and then just program questions for Jared or Katrina and Emma. And Alyssa, I was not going to discuss the alternate assessment. I'm actually not very familiar with the alternate assessment because Tracy Gooley is over all of those alternate assessments and is the one who has created those. So if you have questions about that, please reach out to Tracy and ask those questions.